I'm not doing the introduction anymore. I'll just edit this part out. It's clipping. Did you know? Did you know that in the year 2021, the United States Department of Health and Human Services, otherwise known as HHS, found that 46.3 million people over the age of 12 in America met the DSM-5 criteria for substance use disorder? Addiction, a topic many consider taboo, is not nearly as uncommon as you would think. With these numbers, what mental lens or convenient reality do we construct for ourselves that keep us oblivious to this unfortunately normal reality? What do we tell ourselves, and most importantly, what kind of stigmas do we cast upon sufferers of this disease to keep pushed aside and out of our plain worldview? I speak before you as a recovering addict. In my days of active addiction, I spent 5 years breaking promises, incurring debt, and most regrettably, hiding in isolation. Nowadays, I find myself 2 years sober. And I have chosen to spend that time mending relationships, paying off my debts, and professionally assisting other recovering addicts in early recovery. Merriam-Webster defines stigma as a set of unfair beliefs that a society or group of people have about something. The National Institute on Drug Abuse defines stigma as discrimination against an identifiable group of people, a place, or a nation. Can you think of a time that you were misjudged because of the way you were dressed or for an activity you enjoyed, perhaps even for your cultural preferences? Perhaps you have enough pride to weather the unfair judgments, but how about the times when you didn't? Did you feel safer hiding those parts of yourself, even when hiding those things felt like a betrayal of your identity? Now think about a time you needed help. I want you to think about a time when you needed something and you were too afraid because of what others might think of you. If you related to any of these questions or situations, know that the addicted person suffers from these exact same tribunals. The most common stigma of addiction is that addiction is a choice. While it is true that purchasing and consuming substances, such as alcohol or something even less socially acceptable like fentanyl, is indeed an active choice, the disease of addiction that may result and its eventual habitual and compulsive nature is not. A 2023 study from McMaster University claims that the stigmatization of drug addiction contributes to poor outcomes for individuals attempting to overcome substance use disorder. By referring to addiction as a choice, we erase the reality that addiction is in fact a disease. Terms like junkie, tweaker, drunk feed negative bias and serve to dehumanize people. This enforces the separation that those who suffer from addiction already feel from society at large. Generally speaking, we are all products of our environment. For the substance-addicted person wanting to stop, but not being able to due to habitual and compulsive behaviors adopted by the brain, or fear of torturous and uncomfortable withdrawals resulting from physical dependency, may begin to believe their continued behaviors as a choice. Perhaps the most damaging source of stigmas comes directly from immediate family members. We all have varying degrees of connectivity and emotional closeness with those who raised us, but one fact remains clear: the opinions of the people who raised us echo the loudest. Negative labels from popular media and structural policies that reflect an emotionally negative viewpoint rather than factual or researched material, most commonly from various politicians, unvetted testimonials, well-established celebrity personalities, and most notably nowadays, social media influencers. Because much of these stigmas are held in place institutionally and possibly by those closest to those who suffer, this environmental force can eventually internalize and cause the addict to begin accepting these inaccurate values. These direct influences we can be surrounded with become the genesis and continued maintenance of how one perceives the self. Most notably, becoming a simplified self-image that cause addicted persons to view their compulsion as conscious choices that prove to themselves as failures of their own character. It's not uncommon that long before seeking help, the addicted person goes through a period of giving up. In this period, the substance provides more comfort than the people in their lives ever could. Even if only perceived, it's only a matter of time before someone who is unable to stop begin to believe their value is little. Substance as one of their few, if not only, coping mechanism. With the false notion of looking for the next use being a choice now accepted by the addict, a self-fulfilling prophecy occurs, almost a sort of acceptance of the identity uneducated naysayers bestow upon their actions. When I was neck deep in the bottle myself, I knew I couldn't stop, and the shame that comes from to choose the end of my addiction and assuming no one could understand led to isolation. This brings us to our next point, which is shame. The ultimate bottomless pit, the pit you almost ironically continue to hide in to contain shame. When I was in that pit, the only others I felt comfortable inviting in were other alcoholics, or at the very least drinking buddies. Ones that would be none the wiser given their own shared activities. The worst part of that isolation, which felt like the best part at that time, was feeling no need to regulate anymore. Without a judge or notice my compulsion, I would indulge as much as I wanted. It felt like this false sense of lonely freedom, separated from the stigmatized thoughts of the outside world in regards to my continued the negative feedback loop into oblivion. It's at this point the prophecy is fulfilled. It's easy to say that this part was a choice too, and while partially true, it's also very wrong. When the deviation of addicts is normalized despite medical evidence to the contrary, what from addiction? Surmise. You may be asking, if things get this bad, why didn't you just ask for help? Why didn't you make the choice to stop? My answer to that question is imagine only having one coping mechanism for the difficulties of the world around you. Coping mechanism for so long, you've forgotten what others are out there, and if you do remember any others, that you have forgotten how to use them, or have erased that habit. Now imagine that that one and only coping mechanism is gone. Despite the suffering caused by the disease of addiction, what does your future life look like? Knowing that coping mechanism is unavailable. Simply, it's terrifying. A separation of actions from character is absolutely necessary, as actions of the unwell mind do not serve as indications of positive or negative core character. Becoming socially isolated is the opposite of the community and integration into society that addicts require to excel and begin the work of remaining accountable to their actions and rediscovering their identity that continue to exist underneath the layers of substance abuse disorder. Some of you may know someone who suffers from addiction, and I'm willing to bet you remember the person they were before their identity became their substance. It's important to remember that their drug of choice likely being their primary, if not only, coping mechanism for the world around them, even if simply to cope with the consequences of their continued use. New habits have been formed during active addiction. Breaking the habit and compulsion of addiction is simply the first step. But rising above the other gained behaviors associated with the use or procuring of the drug, whether it be through manipulation, coercion, or theft, will take some time to break as well. In 2017, Corey Harris once said, "The feedback loop that exists between..." Corey Harris once described addiction as the feedback loop that exists between our senses and reason can lead to a crippling of the will that disables our ability to properly relate to God. Now, I'm not here to preach any sort of spiritual or religious teachings of any sort, but I believe that we can surmise God as a metaphor for society or the world around us. The will can be rehabilitated. However, that cannot happen in isolation and rejection, and that certainly cannot happen under the pressures of misconception and popularized stigma. Part of defeating stigma, especially the stigma of an addict's lack of moral character, is re-engaging a will to relate to the world once again. Addicts choose isolation because it is easier, not because it is fulfilling. I won't deny that at times the repeated actions of an addict will cause hurt. Please remember I am mostly speaking in the context of addicts who do want to stop. They have awareness of a problem, but continually stumble backwards or cave to their regular compulsion that comes from their progressive disease. Please don't assume that I am trying to convince you that the weight of someone else's addiction falls entirely on passion and understanding. It's perfectly valid to have your own boundaries and prioritize your own safety and emotional well-being. However, if you know someone who needs help and knows it, try and understand that their disease is one of compulsion and chemical dependency. Try not to judge the character of someone who is acting to survive the sensation of drowning, e.g., withdrawals. Offer some level of understanding, and if you don't have understanding to give, then offer an ear. All of us are just trying to survive. Given the taboo talking point of addiction and the checkered past some recovering addicts may have, it's not often those of us with that history will disclose it to people, and until we've had some time to get to them. Now that I am in recovery and walk among those who maintain their sobriety every day by living at the opposite values that I adopted in addiction, I've seen how many of us there are. I can guarantee almost none of us have done it alone. Clinical and mental health professionals are always a great source to start with, and I openly encourage even the unaddicted person to keep their minds open to them. However, even after professional help and care, the real challenge begins, living day-to-day life. Even those who have spent years drug and alcohol free still have the lingering demon we call addiction lurking in the back of our heads. So please, keep your hearts and your minds open to help your fellow man help themselves. Remember the sheer amount of people we talked about who meet the criteria for addiction. One thing I've learned from my work, both personally and professionally, in people in early recovery, is that we are everywhere. I would like to end with one of my favorite lines from the Narcotics Anonymous 12-step program. There is no therapeutic value like one addict helping another.